Ali Madad, thank you for joining me this evening or morning, whatever it is in your time zone, for this conversation. I am delighted and very honored to have a conversation with three exceptional experts who have been working in the area of alternate dispute resolution and who have been our partners for a long period of time. But before we get there, I'd like us to have a little bit of a context, and so I will start with that process. We all know that conflict is incredibly destructive on families, on individuals, on societies, and our communities. And for that reason, our imams throughout our history have made sure that we have had that ethos of resolving conflict with compassion, with generosity, and with a sense of the future in all of the work that we do. In 1986, as part of the new constitution or the promulgation of the constitution, Maulana Hazrat Imam established the Conciliation and Arbitration Boards. That system of dispute resolution has been part of our history over this period of time. Today, in 19 jurisdictions around the world, with over 800 volunteers who are appointed to serve the Jamaat in that capacity each year, has been part of our work. I am deeply honored to be entrusted with leading this very important institution. Maulana Hazrat Imam has also been very clear that he wants service provided to the Jamaat in a way that is utilizing best practice, exceptional service. He has made it very clear that that service should be what his murids can feel completely comfortable with. And that's why training and development of our mediators and I will tell you about arbitrators has been an important part of the work that ICAB does throughout the world. So in the year 2010, Maulana Hazrat Imam approved the partnership, approved that we engage in a partnership with the Center for Effective Dispute Resolution, which is based in London. And through that organization, we have had our trainers trained to be able to convey that knowledge and that expertise to our mediators in all parts of the world where we provide that service. What is also exceptional, of course, is that we are a unique system that allows for international disputes to be resolved through that process. And so over this period of time, we have had a relationship with CEDAR, and that relationship has continued to this day. In 2015, Maulana Hazrat Imam approved a pilot project for the United States in the area of arbitration. We wanted to make sure that we were able to provide murids with service when mediation failed, and that the court was not the only option available to them. And so in 2015, we entered into a partnership with the American Arbitration Association to train arbitrators in the US and started that pilot project. That pilot project was successful, and we have now expanded that service to Canada. Inshallah, there will come a time when we provide that service in many other jurisdictions in the world. One of the reasons why we chose the partners we have chosen is that they not only provide active service and training, but they actually do many, many things in this sphere. They do mediations, they do arbitrations, they conduct that kind of work. And so we are able to benefit from the actual case programming that they have the benefit of engaging in. And I am really pleased that we have the leaders of these two partners who are here today for me to have a conversation with them about what they see is happening in this area so that we can begin to prepare ourselves for what we think is going to come down the pipe. Of course, none of us knows for sure what will come down that pathway in the future, but we need to anticipate, and that is the purpose of this conversation. So let me introduce you to the two experts that I have with me here today. James South is the managing partner of the Center for Effective Dispute Resolution, affectionately known as CEDAR. Sometimes we're not sure we actually can identify the full name. We were just so used to calling it CEDAR. That's based in London. He has been working in this field for over 25 years. He is a lawyer from New Zealand, has a master's in law in dispute resolution, and he practices widely in this area. He works in the area of corporate commercial disputes, including cross-border and cross-cultural disputes. I'm very pleased to have James with me here today. Steve Anderson is the vice president of the International Center for Dispute Resolution with the American Arbitration Association. We affectionately, and I think you affectionately, call it the AAA. He has over 20 years of experience in international dispute resolution in a variety of fields, from technology, aerospace, insurance, finance, etc. He is, and he devotes a substantial amount of time in the area of training and facilitating dispute resolution education. He is the inaugural winner of the award that was inaugurated by the Silicon Valley Arbitration and Mediation Center as outstanding contribution to technology dispute resolution. Welcome, Steve. Thank you, both of you, for agreeing to be here with me and to have this conversation. Let me start with you, James. The pandemic has been an interesting period of time. I think we could call that a generation defining, a century defining experience we have all been through. And, it added a whole bunch of things to our lives over the period of time. A whole new vocabulary has come out of that. Over this last 18 to 20 months, what are some of the trends that you have seen in the work that you have done over this period of time?
Thanks, Zulie, and it's nice to be back with my friends at ICAB. I think we've seen social trends accelerate because of the pandemic, and I think we've seen that also in relation to dispute and conflict resolution. Two key ones I'll pick up. I think we've seen an increasing use of mediation around the world in different areas. This is particularly because I think the courts are increasing around the world are increasingly backlogged. That in most parts of the world, they've been closed for long periods of time, but people still have conflict. So people are turning to mediation and arbitration, which has managed to keep going. And that brings me to the second trend, which is both mediation and arbitration have been brought online. So if you had have spoken to me about mediation online at the beginning of 2020, at our center, we had virtually none. Now, 18 months later, almost all of mediation is online. And what's been proven is that it's very successful. Actually, the agreement rates, the settlement rates, are actually higher now by 10% than they were in face-to-face. So I think those two trends are really important, and I think they will continue as we come out of the pandemic into the new normal.
That's very interesting, because we had to do exactly that. We had to pivot over to providing online mediation services, and had precisely that kind of experience, a level of reluctance for a period of time, and then a gradual sense of adoption, acceptance of that. But it's interesting to hear that it actually has a higher level of compliance and endurance to the agreement. That's very interesting. Steve, anything you see in the trends that you think we should be particularly mindful of?
I think there's some wonderful. You said it's century defining, and first I want to say thank you. I'm honored to be here in this discussion, and thank ICAB and the both of you to spend some time together. So my thoughts on trends are similar to what James has said. I think I call it a pivot point in our history, and I think, notwithstanding the challenges and struggles of this, that we as a humanity have done some amazing things. And I think if you look at our community and our practice of lawyers, advocacy, mediators, arbitrators, they have stepped up to the plate in amazing ways. Just some examples. Our history of mediations that have gone virtual since March 2020 have been over 1,200 mediation sessions. That's a lot of cases that would have to have been in person, and over almost 8,000 hearings of arbitration and mediation in that time. So a total transition that was historically pushed away and resisted has been adopted and incorporated, and will really change going forward. I think one other thought that is of interesting is kind of this, what I would call an expanded community of new contacts that are in our window within minutes or seconds that weren't accessible otherwise. And that promulgates, I think, easier resolution, easier community. And as you mentioned, I loved your conversation of kind of this ethos of conflict resolution and solution, and those sorts of things make all that easier, I believe. So
that's right. And from your perspective, are there some kinds of disputes that we are seeing more of post or during pandemic or post-pan that you see would continue that we didn't see before? Are they?
Yeah, I would say so. The barriers historically, let's look at starting at a corporate legal department that had a culture of restricted travel costs, or they were too busy to get executives on an airplane or in a mediation. That all changed, right? The 24-hour clock is a challenge we need to still talk about, but we have what I would say a number of companies, small and large, that are much more willing to get into a session of mediation or even arbitration than they were in the past. And so you can look at a myriad of industries, small businesses, maybe family type disputes or otherwise, are now have access, unprecedented access to this forum where they didn't have before. So I would open the door to a myriad of businesses and a myriad of smaller or medium-sized companies that didn't have this on their radar, that could now, as you mentioned, avoid the destruction of conflict resolution.
Mm-hmm. And James, over this period of time, have you seen sort of ideas or opportunities, but also perhaps challenges that a new world era has brought forward that you think companies have accepted, adopted, and embraced as part of that. Certainly online mediation is a part of that, of course. But do you see other things that we have to be mindful of and perhaps accept or embrace, not just accept?
Yeah, just picking up from Steve's point, I mean, I think one of the other areas we're seeing in terms of disputes is obviously we have businesses and individuals who have been in distress um, in quite an exceptional way over the last 18 months. And therefore, we're starting to see the disputes of that distress really come to the forefront. So if you think about in business, we're seeing areas where contracts no longer work because they were negotiated pre-pandemic and don't make sense in this new world. We're seeing situations where parties have agreed not to pursue actions, like in commercial property, and those areas are now being looked at. And also in individuals, as people come back into the workplace, we're seeing the emergence of increased conflict, which maybe has been in abeyance since people have been working from home, and also unfortunately issues around deaths, so around probate and trusts and wills, which are coming more to the fore. But I think what we're also seeing, just to pick up the new trends, is a concept of more collaboration and flexibility, how to deal with things. I think the world of competing against each other is slightly going away, and people realize, look, if we're going to get through this, we're all in it together. And that sense of being in it together fosters an approach of collaboration. Let's work it out how we can get through this and maybe renegotiate our contracts. And I think that's an interesting trend, which I hope we'll hold on to post the pandemic.
So, how do you balance that, or do you, with this other area of a sense of inequity, a sense of conflict that has actually exacerbated, right? In climate change area, in protests around that, it seems like a lot more people want to have their voices heard than were either allowed at the table before. So how does that play out?
James,
I mean, we cannot talk about social trends. Climate change is a massive social trend, which has been accelerated, I think, and the perception of the importance of it over the pandemic. And mediation and other forms of dispute resolution actually are one of the ways where people can have their voice and contribute to the solution. So my pick is that in these areas of climate change, business, and human rights, we will see mediation being increasingly used as a means to help society deal with them.
Steve, what do you think?
I agree. So I think there's a lot of conflict, and you know we sometimes want to shoo it away as a uncomfortable dynamic we don't want to deal with. But I would argue that in most senses we want to address it and confront it and be a little uncomfortable, right? I think those are some of the trends that are good, as long as they're constructive. And that's where I'm going to go back to kind of what James said a little bit here. Having a mediator who is trained in emotional intelligence and aware of these dynamics can have a contribution of conflicting ideas in a positive light is critical. And so I would say, and I would also echo what James said, is that there's a dynamic in our human character now that where we're willing to be a little more self-aware of ourselves and others towards improvement, towards solution, and so it's a great question, Zulie, in that regard, that we need to keep an eye on that and manage conflict appropriately that will help promote change that's needed and helpful and otherwise. I think we did a presentation recently on blind spots that included access, included culture and community issues, included unconscious bias, and otherwise. And I think those are all still really important dynamics for us to consider. And we're at that pivot point to where we can make unprecedented change and progress.
I agree. I think it's really important because I think we have to accept that, conflict, or at least change, is a good thing, and a little bit of disagreement is actually generative. That's when you have ideas come out. It's when it's unmanaged and becomes destructive, that's when it falls apart. And of course, we all know that people remember the negative, right? They remember the insults far more than they will ever remember the compliments. And so that's the part where we have to be careful in why it phrase at the culture of a company, a culture of the society, and individuals as well.
And just to pick up that point, Zulie, if I might, you're absolutely right. And as we're hinting, conflict is inevitable. What is key, though, is not to avoid the addressing of it. And one of my learnings over the last 18 months, and I'm seeing it now, is if you avoid it, it will just exacerbate. And it's natural to want to avoid it because of the pressures going on in our lives, particularly given the pressures in the last 18 months. But one key piece of learning from me, which I would give to your viewers, is think about addressing it early, even if it feels difficult. It's better to do it early and get on top of it and be proactive with your business partners, with other individuals, rather than let it fester, because it'll only be more difficult later on.
Mm-hmm. That is,
or get your CAB mediators involved, because they're great. I know many of them, and they're wonderful.
This is a good part. So, Steve, when we talk about borders, and I mean, they're very permeable. They've become even more permeable over the period of time. Viruses have been permeating, and so have good ideas as well, I think. From your experience, are there sort of key lessons that we can incorporate into our business lives and to our that help us mitigate the risk of destructive conflict? I mean, James has obviously identified, don't let it fester. That's a very good first starting point. What else?
I agree. And I think that I've seen and I've visited, I don't know how many companies over the years, and it's creating a culture that you started with, Zulie, in terms of conflict resolution and being proactive in this. And so echoing that, I think that as we look at these ideas again, we've going back to, again, just some culture of borders and change. This is another great lesson in the last 18 months, is change is okay, actually, right? And if our company culture or our whatever culture we're in is not healthy, look to change, look to learn, and look to include others in your circle of influence that can promulgate not only change but resolution. And again, this goes to mediators and arbitrators, but also teams within your community and otherwise. And so I think those are really important going forward. I would also, just looking at kind of the challenges we have, are being aware of dynamics of access to technology, right? That's a positive and a challenge, I would say, for a company. And while some might be able to do it quickly and otherwise, others have struggles in this area. And you don't want that to be an inhibitor to solution or progress or change. I would also, again, go back to really analyzing and being open to who are within your communities, and unconscious bias and our blind spots, if you will, of conflict resolution. And so those are some of the ideas that I think going forward. We made a rule change to our mediation rules this last March, and a couple points in there that I think are we increased party control towards resolution, and today we have, I think, a great forum in our communities to do that, increase control of those involved. And we also included a Singapore Convention reference, which is a treaty for the settlement of mediation. And it's just an example of, let's find ways to have resolution in our day-to-day activities.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But
I think you make a really good point that just as everyone says about the virus, no one is safe until we're all safe. But if we're leaving people behind, inequity is going to create an ongoing issue of societal unrest and a sense of loss, and feeling left out is going to be a really important factor for us to make sure we're not creating or exacerbating that particular issue. So my last question to both of you is from your vantage point of having been brought in after a problem has already occurred, and of course I don't want to do you out of business, but the kinds of learning that you would have over your period of time, your experience, what are some of the things that you would some advice that you would give to our viewers to anticipate and perhaps prevent some of those kinds of disputes coming up? Let's start with you, Steve.
Great. I would. I think we spend a lot of time in our world looking at conflict, and you mentioned earlier being offended, right, about what was said and those dynamics. And I think if we approach conflict in a risk assessment for future, and you also talked about the future, which I thought was fantastic. What do we need to look forward to the future? And so it's really perspective in conflict resolution. If I was just having a chat with a company on culture, I would ask them, well, what are your policies on mediation and arbitration? Do you have that embedded in your culture? And do you have a system of conflict resolution within your companies to talk about how to resolve this most efficiently, economically, and culturally for your company going forward? So I think that's a benchmark that you really want to create. In some companies, in some industries, and communities do this well, some do not, right? And so being aware of self-awareness, I think, and this is kind of just real practical feedback. And those are my initial thoughts on this, that I would start with those.
Thank you. James, do you have any pearls of wisdom to share with us?
I have two thoughts. I'm not sure whether they're wisdom. The first is be courageous in how you look to the future. We are going through a period of massive change, and there's an opportunity for massive amounts of creativity about how we solve the problems of now and going forward. So in being proactive in that, if you're dealing with a conflict or dispute, be courageous in being creative about how you resolve it. And I think if two parties work together and be creative, it's amazing as human beings what we can achieve when we're creative together. So that would be my first piece of advice. And also, I think we have been through a period of collective loss. We've been through an exceptionally difficult time, and it is normal now that some of that loss is going to emerge. And I think it's okay for us to express that loss, be it a business loss, be it an individual loss, a sense of grief, a sense of frustration. Those are all normal parts of resolving conflict. And maybe by letting them out in an appropriate way through mediation or other processes, it'll help us move on, because we can't bottle it up. We need to release it in order to move on. So those are two thoughts about the way forward for me.
Great.
Zulie,
Thank you.
One more quick thought, just adding to his, is sometimes we're afraid to turn to people who have expertise. And I look at ICAB, and I say this sincerely, don't be afraid to ask questions and seek those people who can assist and help. And I think we have this embedded thing as I can do it myself. I don't need any help. And I would say, with everything James just said and what we talked about, ask questions, learn, and don't be afraid to turn to those who have some process and sophistication towards conflict resolution.
Thank you. Those are actually really important pearls of wisdom. They really are. Thank you both very much for your time. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Likewise.
This morning or this afternoon or this evening, whatever it is for your time zone, we wanted to talk to you about resilience and courage. Resilience for us individually is when we can anticipate and prepare for the future and what is coming forward. Resilience for us as a community is making sure we have systems and institutions in place to be able to assist members of the Jamaat who need help at times. And Maulana Hazrat Imam has made that a very important priority for the Jamaat. Individual courage means that we should be able to have that part of us which seeks help. And as our guest said earlier, sometimes we don't want to reach out for help, but that is the most powerful way in which we can get the support we need to be able to move to the future. And so I want to say to you, that would be the courageous thing to do when you've got issues that you think need support, and to seek help as we move forward. I hope you have enjoyed this particular session with me. I want to say, wherever you are, in whatever part of the world you live in, we wish you safety, good health, and happiness. Khuda Hafiz, Yad Madat, Salam, thank you, goodbye.